I live here in Florida. We'd like to play on the lake and do water skiing and surfing and that sort of thing. And that summer, we had an alligator that was coming around and a bit more present than normal. And if you don't live in Florida, you think that's crazy. If you live in Florida, you understand. But I would tell the boys, I would joke around with them, hey, I would wrestle an alligator for you. And I meant it. Like if an alligator, and almost every dad means this, right? Like if an alligator was physically attacking your child on the beach, you would run into the water and no doubt you would wrestle the alligator to save your kid's life. But, one morning I was coming back from a run and God just hit me in the face and said, if you say you'll wrestle an alligator, will you wrestle yourself with me for their sake?
Welcome to the Deeper Experiences with God podcast. I'm your host, Dave Ripper. My hope is that through conversations, teachings, and practices on the Christian spiritual life, that you might experience an ever-deepening life with God. As we begin, let's take a moment to simply be still and know that God is with you, right where you are, right as you are. Well, hey friends, I'm so glad you joined us for Deeper Experiences with God. I'm excited for today's episode because it's a little unique. Many of our episodes feature guests who are a lot like me, a pastor or spiritual formation executive director or professor, people who spend the majority of their working hours kind of doing explicitly Christian work. But I'm excited today to have with me Dr. David Goodman. David works as an OBGYN physician, surgeon, professor, and also inhabits space in offering spiritual formation and coaching, especially for fathers and your young sons, through a training that he's pioneered called Base Camp 322. One of my teachers, Trevor Hudson, believes many Christians suffer from what he calls a split spirituality. We divide our Sunday faith from our Monday work, or our physical lives from our spiritual lives. But I'm intrigued to be with David today to see how he harmonizes things like his faith and work, and personally just learn how he raises his three sons, keeping the end in mind of having them be formed into Christ-like men as they grow up. And I think what David has learned through his life's experiences, especially some of the moments of pain and struggle that I've heard him talk about, can help bridge the gaps that a lot of us might have between our spiritual lives and our ordinary, everyday living. David was introduced to me from a past podcast guest, Todd Hall, who's developed significant work in the area of relational spirituality with a focus around the role attachment plays in our relationships with God and with others. And so I'm thankful to see how David is building on that work related to fathers and sons in particular. And I'm eager to implement a lot of what I've been reading about through his work in the lives of my own sons. And I'm sure even my little daughter will benefit from some of these things as well. So David, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And to help us get to know you a little bit better, could you share some of your background and story that takes us through a pretty great journey from medicine to global health and then to what you describe as a significant life pivot?
Yeah, Dave, it is great to be with you. And I've enjoyed being a listener to your podcasts and reading your books. And it's great to contribute to the audience today. So you're right that I do have an atypical background for a typical guest on this podcast. Part of my journey is I went to medical school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And it was there that the Lord continued to do a work on me, really breaking my heart for the poor around the world. And it's there that I learned the real weight of maternal mortality and how women continue to die in other countries around the world. So I learned about that and really gave the next 10 years of my life to being trained. I added on an additional master's in public health leadership, and focused on program planning and evaluation for that. I then went to residency, and residency is a long, hard situation that it's a situation you simply have to survive. But I tried to learn to thrive in the middle of it and still maintain some spiritual vibrancy. And then after residency, my wife and I moved to Tanzania with our 1-year-old son at the time, and I did a global health fellowship with Duke University, and through the course of that event, what I thought was going to be spending my life kind of working and helping to reduce maternal mortality actually the Lord worked in my life to reveal my own incompleteness and my own need to continue to grow in wisdom and grow deeper. So that brought us back to Orlando, Florida, where my wife is from and where I currently live. And the last few years have been another journey of growing in wisdom and learning what it means to walk deeper with God.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm
Yeah.
intrigued here just by a little of your educational background. I knew about UNC Chapel Hill. I didn't know
Hmm.
about Duke. So you don't
Yeah.
typically see that sort of
No.
combination. So where's your greater loyalty lie if it's March Madness?
Oh, man. The only thing allowed in our house with Duke on it was the paycheck and one coffee cup. And so actually, I went to Clemson for undergrad, so I absolutely adore Clemson. I pulled for Carolina. My wife and her whole family are Tar Heels, so it is Clemson first, Carolina second, and never Duke.
Okay. I won't let my son hear this podcast as
Yes.
he
All
is a
right.
big Duke fan. So that's
Yes.
okay. But all are welcome here, no matter who is listening. So, well, I'm
Yes.
eager to talk about some of what's developed with Basecamp
For
322. But
sure.
first, just for those who are listening, I have a lot of friends in my life that live and work in the medical world
Hmm.
and or another kind of similar vocation. So, just to begin, how have you learned to integrate your faith and your life with God into like your everyday profession? And perhaps have there been ways that approach has changed as you've entered into this deeper journey of formation and life with God?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the reasons that I love Dallas Willard so much, as your podcast often references, was his commitment to that bivocational kind of life. And so
Mm,
I originally imagined my life as a medical missionary, which really forces you into that dual world of kind of clinical practice and kind of missional living. When we left Tanzania, my wife and I uh, really aimed to be missionaries to a post-Christian America. And that has taken different, that's evolved and looked different at different stages of our life. But one of the, you asked about me personally, my own personal practice, growing up and attending a lot of the medical doctor, conferences, seminars, writings, a lot of times what people are really focused on is how do you pray with patients and share the gospel,
mm,
right? Kind of a, um, when you view the entirety of your Christian experience as helping people get to heaven when they die, then you're so focused on that. How do you close the deal?
mm,
And one of the things that I've learned from the spiritual formation community has been how deeply and richly God wants to live with us in our everyday life and how he invites us into a holistic health that's not measured by those same metrics, like kind of closing the deal with patients. And so I think for me in residency, one of the hardest things was just trying to have some sort of devotional time at 4 a.m. and valuing that to when you're working 80 hours a week to continue to commit that time to, I am going to press into the Lord. I'm going to seek into the Lord. We actually had, pretty devastating health crisis in my family while I was a resident. And we may or may not have time to go into that. But during my current life now, so I work in a high stress, high volume obstetric hospital. And, a few things that I have found simply, whenever you get on the elevator in the hospital to go around, see patients and whatnot, most people, what are they doing nowadays? They pull out their phones and they're looking at them and they start scrolling. I have found I've started trying to take that as an opportunity when I get on the elevator. When I go up, I pray a psalm and direct my gaze upward towards the Lord. When I'm
wow.
going down on the elevator, I keep my phone away and I really kind of direct it more inward and saying like, God, what are you doing in me? What do you want to do through me? What's going on in my heart? And use that as a little prompt for self-examine. I, have found there are times when, running to the operating room to do emergency surgeries can be nerve wracking. And, I've started just taking the moment to pause, while I'm scrubbing my hands and getting ready for surgery to quote Psalm 23 and just
Mm,
say, Lord, even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will
mm,
fear no evil, for you're with me. And so, motivated, honestly by that great Dallas Willard quote of, um, when we begin to practice turning our mind towards God, we will continue to be redirected to him like a compass on a needle, trying to redirect my heart over and over again to him in those moments, and taking them as an opportunity and an invitation to do that.
Those are really helpful practices and encouragements. I just think about that. Okay, that might be a new way to just ride an elevator going
There
up,
you go.
lifting my eyes up to the hills, going down, that kind of a
Yep.
search me and know me, oh God. And maybe
Yep.
in the midst of that, there might even be maybe a pivotal little conversation that can be had between a couple floors with people in there. And I think
For
you're
sure.
right. So much of prayers is turning back to God again and again and again. And I love your reliance. I even think the first part of Psalm 23 too, I imagine is really helpful. Is
Mm.
God is my shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Even though there's a
Mm-hmm.
crisis, even though this is certainly an emergency, I'm glad to know medical physicians are seeking the
Mm-hmm.
Lord like you are. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, we try.
You kind of
We try.
mentioned a little bit about kind of a health crisis and emergency in your own family. Kind of pivot from the workspace to your
Yeah.
family life a little bit now, and how this formational journey has been maybe shaping your marriage, and then even maybe get into some of the ways it's impacted you as a father of 3 sons.
Yeah. So I'm sure everybody signed up for a 3-hour podcast today. So I hope they're excited for that. But I, so interestingly, my wife had a massive seizure the day after we got married. And
Wow.
so she's a beautiful, healthy, athletic young lady. And the day after we got married, she had a generalized seizure in our little honeymoon hotel room. And just, we're about to go out to dinner. And she is just shaking uncontrollably. And I, was at the end of my medical training, but I was freaking out more than I was really being a good doctor. I remember praying and just telling God, like, I know I promised in sickness and in health, but I didn't think you'd press me on it today. And we went into a really difficult time. And, in some ways that time was a bit more of an intellectual wrestling with God, the problem of evil. How can a good God let this happen? And my wife was just an amazing saint in the way that she processed this and worked through it. But a few years in, it really felt like she was miraculously healed. And we celebrated that. We believed it. And we moved to Africa. We lived remotely in a low income, low development area. And then we came back, had kids. And 3 years ago, her epilepsy came back
Mm. Sorry.
in actually a very dramatic fashion. And, um, and it had been a year or two that we had been living in a different world. We had been organizing our family around a rule of life. We've been implementing these practices like the prayer of examine, imaginary prayer, fasting, Sabbath, all these things into our life. And it was, in some ways, like the Lord held his hand back for just long enough for us to have kids free of birth defects associated with the medication, to go to Africa to do these things. And then when it came back, we actually were prepared for it, and we were built for this. We were able to walk this painful journey with God, and we were strengthened and made more robust because of the practices that we had built into our lives. It wasn't the situation that, well, it's like God wasn't keeping up his end of the bargain, so we're going to stop the practices. It's like, no, we're going to trust this and
Mm.
lean into this. And, by God's grace, he's doing really well right now. And we know that we live in constant tension with, God is being gracious, but this could always change. But we trust him no matter what. And as you can imagine, being a busy father with a lot of goals and ambition, when your life is threatened with chronic illness, it is hard to thrive as a parent. I'll say that. And so
Yeah.
while I think I was a pretty good parent a pretty good husband during a lot of this, my parenting really struggled. And it was around this time that, I, after a moment where my son and I were both acting like 4-year-olds with slam doors and yelling and whatnot, that I came downstairs, and it was almost like this voice of Dallas Willard from all that I had taken in, and God speaking in my brain just said, you will never achieve the ends of the kingdom using the means of the world. And it really shook me.
Wow.
to a strong degree. And I think it was there that I had to begin to do a reckoning with what am I really trusting to build my kids, and am I aiming to become a person defined by love? And I had to commit to an absolute refusal to stop trusting the means of the world, and start really motivating towards the end of becoming a person of love.
Wow. Well, I'd love to just affirm uh, how well you have approached the disciplines. Like a lot of
Mm,
people don't practice these things because life is going well, and then when they hit
yeah.
crisis, then it's
Mm,
I need community, I need
mm,
friendship,
mm,
and it just doesn't emerge right away or instantaneously, and people get
yeah.
bitter and resentful, kind of blame the church, but the time to be implementing a lot of these disciplines is when things are going well, even when you don't know what's coming next. And
Absolutely.
that's one of the definitions of like a spiritual discipline I have heard
Yeah.
before is like a spiritual practice is really like a chosen
Mm,
discipline to suffer in some way,
mm,
kind of that ascetic practice, so that I deny myself in some way, even when things are good, so that when things inevitably do crash around us, there's a preparation, there's a strength, and just want to affirm your approach to that. And could you give me a couple examples about the means of the world that weren't working to try and help you achieve this
yeah.
kingdom end?
Mm. Gosh, I think parenting is so easy to, I mean, use anger, threats, all these sort of things to get your way.
Mm,
I like to, one of the things that I teach in Basecamp 322 is, a lot of times dads, we're trying to get kids to bed, the parents are exhausted and kids just finds whole new energy, right? And they're bouncing around, they're doing all sorts of crazy things. And often you can use anger and yelling and threats to get the kids into their bedroom. But one of the things that, one of my friends discovered is that if he would just go away and disappear into the kid's bed and wait for him there. It might take him 2 or 3 minutes for him to come, but it was the love of that child actually caused him to move into the room and want to be with his father.
mm,
And so I think that, some of those things of using the means of the world is when we think that threats and anger are going to do for us what only love can do, then we're not really trusting the means of the kingdom. And so I think a lot of this comes down to also like what is really driving us.
yeah.
And so I think I've heard, John Ortberg say that you cannot really love somebody when you need something from them.
Mm,
And what I had to learn was that in some ways I needed my kids to be orderly and obedient and impressive to some extent. And that was an absolute barrier to me loving them well. And so when you release that need, and what your kids being slow to get their shoes on, making you late for church, isn't it's no longer a threat to how people view you as a responsible person. It's simply an opportunity to teach your kids how to get ready in a timely manner.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that. Around anger, I love Dallas's
Yeah.
line that anything done with anger can be
Mm,
done a whole lot better without it.
so true.
And that's certainly one of those ways that we utilize worldly means to try and accomplish our own
Mm,
personal ends. And yeah, I think one of the things too is a parent to three, and I've got three pastors' kids, and
mm,
they fit that stereotype pretty well. But
really?
you really have to surrender impression management. Like my sense of who I am is not intricately tied to my children's behavior necessarily,
Yeah.
or if I'm pressuring them for that. I found
Mm,
that I talk with a lot of PKs about, what would you what do you wish your parents did not do, and what could I
yeah.
particularly learn from as a dad to make sure of that? And I think that was one of the biggest things that a
Mm,
lot of pastors' kids had a lot of hurt and resentment when they felt like, their behavior was too much a reflection on their parents' identity.
mm,
And so that's a tough thing to relinquish and release, that nagging sense that we need to manage the impressions that other people have of us rather than being God's beloved.
mm.
And so, tell me a little bit how you've translated some of all of that, both struggle and just a lot of pain and angst around, your wife's health and then how that's impacted you parenting. Tell me about Basecamp 322 and what's the 322 and a little bit of
Yeah.
your vision for this and then how do you find time to do it in the midst of your schedule? I'm fascinated
Mm.
to hear.
So I've been interested in coaching for quite some time. My in-laws have a ministry background and have done some coaching at the executive level, and I realized that I was being coached by them. And so I was interested in learning what it means to actually be a coach. So not quite a therapist, not a pastor, not a spiritual director, but actually being a wise conversational guide that helped people be the expert of their own lives more effectively. That involves, reducing or eliminating limiting beliefs and gaining clarity about where you want to move forward. Actually, Dallas Willard's VIM mnemonic, vision, intention, and means is really one of the best coaching frameworks there is out there. But for me, I was in my first coaching class with a physician, and I was doing just a practice conversation, and this guy was talking about his life. He had been a Christian doctor, connected to community and church, and his son was graduating high school. And he was talking about that experience and the weight of uncertainty that he had, that his son was going to be okay when he was out on his own, was paralyzing. And it was that night, having that conversation, that I said, I want to be uniquely skilled at helping men in particular feel like they're prepared to really help their sons launch well. What I realized is that there are some really good resources out there, particularly John Tyson's The Intentional Father, and other things that focus on these kind of adolescent period from 13 to 18 and kind of malehood initiation. And there's great stories and writing about that. But what I found is there was less information available for kind of young parents raising young kids and boys in particular. I think a lot of dads don't want to go reading multiple parenting books and whatnot. And so they come into parenting with a preconceived notion of what it means to form boys, and that's helping them be tough and kind of, honestly, kind of suck it up and be a man when they're not physically men, and they can't do that. And so I wanted to stop laying that sort of weight on my kids, and so I did what doctors do. Is I read a ton of books about this, and I created a framework that I had to have to survive. When God gave me 3 boys, I knew that I had a calling on my life to be a man maker, and I had to get that right in life. And so I started putting these resources together. I started mapping out my own kid's journey, and then friends around me started saying, "Hey, could you tell us some about that? Could you teach us about that?" And so now I do that both kind of at our church, like on our classroom, kind of small group level, and then more broadly via this course that I mentioned, Basecamp 322, and in coaching conversations with dads.
That's wonderful. And so the 3 main movements of that, you describe it as stalk the beast, set up the camp, and stoke the fire. So it's kind of just curious. Let's imagine you were going to coach me. I've got 2 of my 3 kids are boys, 10 and 8, and maybe I have a couple of my friends here with me with their sons or who are fathers to sons. Walk us through a little bit of what this might be like. So how do I begin by kind of stalking the beast as you describe it?
So stalking the beast, I actually was reviewing some old notes from Dallas in preparation for this conversation. I found this amazing quote that in Renovation of the Heart, Dallas says, "Christian spiritual formation rests on the indispensable foundation of death to self and cannot proceed except insofar as that foundation is firmly laid." So this is what stalking the beast really entails. That, one of the stories for this is, I live here in Florida. We like to play on the lake and do water skiing and surfing and that sort of thing. And that summer we had an alligator that was coming around and a bit more present than normal. And if you don't live in Florida, you think that's crazy. If you live in Florida, you understand. But I would tell the boys, I would joke around with them, "Hey, I would wrestle an alligator for you." And I meant it. Like if an alligator, and almost every dad means this, right? Like if an alligator was physically attacking your child on the beach, you would run into the water and no doubt you would wrestle the alligator to save your kid's life. But one morning I was coming back from a run and God just hit me in the face and said, if you say you'll wrestle an alligator, will you wrestle yourself with me for their sake? And so that's what stalking the beast is all about, is that every man enters life with, to some degree, a false self. That's, the story of the younger brother in the prodigal son, he says that when he was off in a far country, he came to himself. Well, what does it mean to come to himself unless he was away from himself? And so the story of spiritual formation always begins with confrontation. And so there's false narratives, there's lies that control us, and those false narratives and lies will bleed out on your son if you haven't brought them into light and ultimately put them to death. Not every guy wants to talk about that, but I believe that it is the essential place to start, just like Dallas did, because if the beast is still lurking, then you can't do the other things like setting up camp. Because this is what I wanted to do. I am a productive person. I'm an ambitious person. And I wanted to put all that aside. I wanted to, keep marching on and organize my life and family. But I kept finding that there were things lurking in my, proverbial shadow side that were messing that up. And so once you clear that and have these conversations with your wife, with close friends, you can begin to set up camp.
Hey, David, before talking about setting up camp, I'd be curious to know, perhaps in your life or in the life of other guys that you have been coaching and working with, what might be a couple of the beasts that people have to stalk down? Like I find I resist the hardest what I need the most. And so what might be the thing I need to confront? What are some examples of things that we would rather sweep under the rug or ignore that would be really helpful for us to confront that you've seen in men's lives or even your own life?
Yeah, I think, so many men walk around with this expectation that they must perform rather than being formed, and that it's better to be admired than it is to really be known. And so I think that, what I have found is that the Enneagram personality is a helpful tool for exposing what your shadow side is. So for me, I'm an Enneagram 3. That's often known as a performer, the chameleon or achiever. And, one of the criticisms of that type, the false narratives, is that it is better to maintain the appearance of success rather than to be displayed as imperfect. And the way that idea was polluting my marriage was devastating. And the way that I was trying to perform for my wife, that everything was perfect, when she knew it wasn't, was unhelpful. In the way that I was trying to use my kids to, make me look more impressive was devastating. And so I think that's a clear example of. So here's a great example. My son, when he was like 4 or 5 years old, his first soccer team, he was out there playing, and he, so I'm an extroverted, athletic dad. He just was shell shocked getting out there on the soccer field. And as soon as you said his name and brought any attention to him, he froze and he wouldn't play. And so, typical dad response is get out there, son, go do good, be brave. And it took everything that I had to just be patient with him and just let him be scared and let him, stay. Actually, one of our dear friends was his coach, and he would just go stand beside him and walk around the field with him. And to let that happen and be patient with it and let him come out on his own time took a lot of work in me, but it was work that I had to do. If I wasn't aware of the beast inside of me that wanted to use other means to get him to play, I couldn't have done that, and I would have harmed him and wounded him in the meantime.
What's that conversation with God like for men as they stalk the beast and we want to surrender that and pivot? What's that like?
Oh, I think this is where life with God comes most acutely into play, is that, for so many men, whether it's, messing up at work or feeling inferior to someone else because they don't know certain things about the Bible or whatever. And so many men are tripped up with lust and just making poor choices related to exercise, food, sleep, distraction, all sorts of things that they feel are disqualifying. The narrative in our head, the limiting belief, is that you need to avoid God for a while, right? That you should avoid God, go do some things like show up at church, do something, and then approach God with your goodness. But I think that the practice here is, sitting with Jesus in your messiest place and just trusting that he wants to be with you and letting him be there and speak into it, because you can never begin to really address a place that you don't invite Jesus into. And doing that is sadly counterintuitive to the way most of us were brought up in the faith.
No, thank you. That is so well said and so true and so good. I remember in my early 20s, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzaro came out, and he looked at all the false selves that, Henry Nouwen writes about and others, and
Yep.
the first real temptation to believe the live performance that I am what I do, and
Yes.
or I am what others think, or I am what I have or lack, and to be freed from that, to no, I am God's beloved son, and just to simply
Yeah.
receive that and not earn that. One of the hardest movements of the spiritual life, I think, for a lot of American men in particular, who find so much of our self-worth and accomplishment. And I felt a lot of freedom when I got to study with Dallas, and never forget when he finished the class, he quoted from the Divine Conspiracy, and he gave me so much freedom and liberty as he said, "What God gets out of your life is the person you become. It's not all that you achieve. It's not what your family looks like. It's who you are. That's what we take with us." And
Yes.
that's something I've really brought into parenting as well. What God gets out of my children's lives are the people they become, and
Yes.
just putting on that performance treadmill to try and help them overachieve compared to their peers, which is such a temptation. Oh my goodness. I'm a soccer coach. So I think I'm on my 18th team that I've been there.
Wow.
And boy, all the parents who are just trying to one up, all the things they're putting their kids in and giving them like a
Yep.
leg up. And boy, the sense of inferiority you constantly feel when you find out other kids are getting opportunities you're not giving your kids. But we kind of have to just surrender to the fact that we are also helping our kids discover an identity and a character that will be most receptive to the joy and power and life of God in their lives, which we cannot give them anything better than that. And so we have to say no to a lot of things, and that means I have to say no a lot to my own ego, as you're kind of talking
Yes.
about here.
Yes. It's so well said.
So we've stopped the beast, and
Yes.
let's imagine we're pivoting now to the second stage of kind of setting up camp. Talk about
Yeah.
that a little bit here.
So I firmly believe that we are pulled into our future through a mission and vision that we have for our lives. Dallas says this in Renovation of the Heart, and executive coaches and the kind of performance literature and leadership says exactly the same thing. And that it is that I believe that families need a mission statement, just like major corporations and churches and whatnot, that helps them define who they are and where they're heading. And so Setup Camp is built around 4 M's: your mission, your messages, your moments, and the milestones. And so I compel parents to develop a mission statement for their family that makes them unique. And it answers those questions of like, are we a sports family that commits everything to soccer, or are we something else? And if you have clarity about who you are trying to become, then you have freedom to not try to be who everyone else is. And if you move towards messages, a mission may be something that you have like put on your wall. Like we have it framed on a little chest of drawers in our dining room.
What does it say?
So our mission is we exist to nurture the spiritual, emotional, and physical health of everyone in our sphere of influence.
Love that.
And so that mission took us to Tanzania, and it also brought us back. And it birthed Basecamp 322. And it's partly why I'm having this conversation, is that I'm trying to live on mission for whatever God wants to use for my sphere of influence. And so it's nice to say those things and put them on paper somewhere. But what our kids actually learn are the messages that they hear in our house. And so, there's a thing in medical training called the hidden curriculum, where you learn like, patient care and autonomy and compassion, by the books. But then you meet the surgeon who, throws instruments around the room when he gets mad, or the resident who's grumpy and burned out and yells at you and dismisses patients. You learn these things through observation, right? And the same thing happens for families. Like your parents might say, "We love everybody," but they also hear the tone when you talk about certain people, or they might say, "It's okay if you don't do well at blank," but kids also learn what the true messaging is. And so I invite families to consider, what are the unspoken messages that are ongoing in your home, and how do you reinforce those? And then moments are simply the habits and the highlights. So what are the practices and kind of rule of life inside your house? And are you living your days intentionally? And both kind of from the disciplines and kind of the hard stuff, like the core healthy habits, but then also the highlights. Like, what are the moments in your week where you're, dumping ice cream in the bowls and celebrating and really honoring and cherishing the important things. And then milestones gets into this concept of boys in particular need these milestones. Typically 13 years old, kind of the beginning of like malehood initiation. Then 18 years old, kind of sending off into like kind of manhood. That's John Tyson's Primal Path talks about that really well. I try to institute a earlier milestone in our life, and this comes from the idea of milestones is ubiquitous in other cultures. I was able to interact with the Maasai people when I lived in Tanzania and been to Kenya. So, they're notorious for the way they train and raise up their boys in their community. So I've started taking a trip with my son when he's 8 years old, and we call it the base camp trip. And we go to Clemson, back to a major part of my life and kind of really making my faith my own. We go on a hike where I carry extra weight in my pack, and I put 5 weights in my backpack. We go on a hike up to the top of this hill in South Carolina. And then at the top, I give them one of the weights. The 5 weights represent the 5 people in our family and say, I'm your father. I'm here to carry the weight of our family. But I'm going to give you your weight, and you're going to learn to carry it on your own. And, my oldest son, he was halfway down the mountain. He was like, "Dad, this weight is really heavy." And, my Sylvester Stallone dad wanted to be like, "Well, suck it up and carry it." But I just took it from him. I said, "You're right, buddy. It is really heavy. And one day you'll be able to carry it for yourself." So we do that kind of this, motivational, symbolic, hike. We have the sex talk and kind of start that initial conversation of, the birds and the bees. And we really wanted to get out in front of that conversation and be the experts for our kids. And then we just enjoy a football game at Clemson and just delight in these things. And we have all these things in our milestone that fits our family. So that is deciding what's going to work for your family. And the setup camp stage is your opportunity to do that.
I love that. I love even the distinction you make kind of between mission and messaging. A lot of us can have a great mission, but boy, just the day-to-day life, we really slip up on the
Yep.
messaging. And one of the ones we've done with our kids, just for me personally, because I, have just counseled so many men along the way that have the father wounds and the issues. And I thought there's probably going to be plenty of things that are going to either cause my pastor kids to be in therapy or become stand-up comedians, which it seems like is a path a lot of pastors' kids take. But one of our little mantras, it's mine, every night for each of my kids, there's just a moment of they hear their dad say, "I love you, I'm proud of you, and you bring me so much joy." And some nights it's not that significant to them. And then other nights it's very personally felt, especially if they've had a hard day. And occasionally I'll experiment not saying it to see if they really notice. And it'll be interesting. I'll be leaving the room and, a kid will just kind of like, whisper out a little bit, "You didn't say it." And,
Wow.
what a moment that can kind of be just to help them be able to receive that deep sense of attachment and belovedness, which we crave. And, as you've done work there with Todd, like that level of
Yeah.
attachment that we often have with a parental figure is going to be very representative of the kind of attachment many of us initially at least have with God
Yep.
until we unpack the layers of this. So those are wonderful. So tell us
Yeah.
lastly here as we kind of start to wrap up. What does it look like then to stoke the fire after stalking the beast and setting up camp?
So stoking the fire is what you were just talking about. So it is helping dads understand how important attachment is and what's hopefully kind of guy friendly language. So it's not your wife telling you what book to read or somebody on Instagram, promoting this concept, but it really flows out of my work with Todd and what I learned from him, how important attachment was, both to help our children form a healthy relationship to God, but also for us to form lasting relationships with each other. One of the things Todd talks about is the comfort challenge matrix, and so that we have to hold both of those in tension. And if we're overly comforting without challenge, we harm our kids by coddling them. And if we just challenge our kids without really comforting them, then we also harm them by creating unrealistic expectations. And so in Stoke the Fire, I try to encourage fathers that what matters more in your pre-adolescent children's life, more than academics and more than athletics, is attachment. And for me, it took me a long time to learn, and really it was Todd's work, that I was not going to wound my children by being loving towards them. I was so afraid that if I coddled my kids, they would be cupcakes, right? Like I thought the world was hard and they needed to get on with it and learn to suffer. But I actually learned that it was the boys in particular who cower at an angry father or are coddled with overcomfort, who don't have the courage that it takes to go out and explore the world, to live into their own calling, to explore and feel safe to fail and then come back. And so what we're trying to do, I always say in Basecamp 322, we are not trying to add things to your life. We're just trying to help you do everything you're already doing differently. And so how do you start to view the things that you're already doing through a different lens of attachment, and asking yourself this question: okay, am I building attachment or not for my son? And that's where the phrase 322 comes from. So in Luke 322 is the moment of Jesus's baptism, where God says to him, "You are my beloved son, with you I'm well pleased." And I'm convinced that if we can get our boys to adolescence, to that kind of base camp 13-year-old stage before they launch on their ascent to the top of their proverbial mountain, that if we can get them to the base camp labeled 322, knowing they are deeply loved, growing up in a house that's been intentionally formed with a father who's done his work, that boy is set up for success. And, I love, fathers with daughters and families with girls, but honestly, the data that boys are facing in the world and the future for them is really concerning. And so for me, as a father of boys and a public health expert, I found this is one of the best ways to help change what's hopefully going to be a resolving major issue for our culture.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how much courage we can live with when we know we are so unconditionally loved. So what a gift to give our kids. And I think you're exactly right. That could be what could revolutionize a lot of male identity and a lot of the challenges that we really see. And seems like I've observed a wave of men coming to our church kind of out of nowhere almost. And it seems like the number of single dads outnumbers the amount of single women, single moms coming, at least in our Northeast context these days, but so much woundedness there. And it seems like guys are latching on to all sorts of things that might not be their beloved identity in these days to make themselves feel significant and like they matter, after society's kind of told a lot of guys they are the problem. And so there's a fighting back, but I'm not sure it's always healthy. But boy, if we can receive our beloved identity in God as men and allowing that to start early, this is so vital. So this has been a wonderful conversation here, David. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thanks.
This is just provoking a lot of good, thinking for how I can even be more intentional as a parent. I'm excited to get to share this with a lot of other parents and dads. I think it'll be so valuable. But before we wrap up, I'd just love to ask, would you be able just to guide us in a little bit of a prayer that could help us experience God a little bit more deeply through all the things that we've been speaking about?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I encourage fathers to do at the end of Basecamp 322 is to write their own kind of daily mantra. Mantra is just a tool for the mind. And I built mine around Colossians 3:12. And the three words Paul uses to describe us are beloved, chosen, and holy. So just take a minute, pause. The first half is going to apply to anybody, but I have the middle portion is particular to me. You can think of what yours would be, and then we'll wrap it up. So I am a beloved son of a true and faithful father. I am a chosen brother of Jesus who gave himself for me. And I am a holy dwelling for the Spirit, a place where heaven and earth overlap. I am holy, chosen, and deeply loved, and from this comes my calling. Just pause for a second and think about, what is your vocational calling in this world as it relates to the reality of your belovedness, holiness, and the chosen relationship with God? I am a dreamer who believes God can bring abundance out of the dust, a maker who works with the Spirit to create inspiring things. And I am a healer flowing from Christ's healing work in me. I am united to my wife in a glorious mystery for my good, and I am tasked with forming my boys and to be formed by them. I will live by the Spirit, for that is the path of life and peace. Amen.
Amen. That's so good. Well, thank you again, David. And for folks who might want to engage in your work or connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you and follow what you're up to?
So everything lives at basecamp322.com. That's the numbers 322. And my email address is just david@basecamp322.com. And I'd love to connect with people and offer resources. The course is free right now. This is simply a passion project that I want to use and see what God wants to do with it to bless a generation of fathers.
Amen. Amen. Well, thanks, David, and thanks to everyone who is listening. And as you go about your day today, I hope that you know that you are not what you do or what others think or what you have or lack. You are God's beloved child, holy and chosen and called, and may you live from that place of deep belovedness. Grace and peace, friends. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Deeper Experiences with God. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who might find it helpful. You can find more episodes and show notes at podcast.daveripper.com.